I trust that you're well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on subject and predicate. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts. Grade 7. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of subject and predicate. So we see that our chapter is subject and predicate. Our subject is English language arts. Grade 7. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of under this chapter of subject and predicate, right, is to identify the complete subject or complete predicate of a sentence. And we're also going to identify the simple subject or simple predicate of a sentence. All right. Okay, so when it comes to subject and predicate, right? Every sentence It has a complete subject as well as a complete predicate, right? And a complete subject, right? It tells you who or it tells you what is doing something, who is doing the action. And when it comes to a complete subject, right, it is the simple subject plus any other words that describe or modify it. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be, for example, the name of a person or name of a thing, right? So, for example, it says she sleeps late on the weekends. She sleeps late on the weekends. And if we were to identify our subject, right? Because now you're asking yourself, who sleeps late on a weekend, right? And then our subject is she, because it tells us what she is doing. And then also, her best friend sleeps late on the weekend. And if we were to ask ourselves, like, who sleeps late on the weekends, right? And then we can say her best friend. And that is why we were saying it is a simple subject plus any other words. So, which means that it can either be just she, which is the subject, or it can be, for example, any other words, like her best friend. So basically, the complete subject, it tells us who sleeps late on the weekend, right? So it's either she or we can say her best friend. All right. Now we're going on to a complete predicate, right? And a complete predicate, right? It tells you what the subject is doing. This is like saying it's the verb, right? And it is the simple predicate, it's like your simple verb, plus any other words that describe or modify it. For example, if we look at our sentence, right, it says, her best friend sleeps. So now we need to ask ourselves basically, what is her best friend doing? So we can just give the simple one by saying sleeps. And then we have another sentence which says, her best friend sleeps late on the weekends, right? So now it's like asking yourself, what is her best friend doing? And then we can say sleeps late on the weekends. That is a simple predicate, sleeps, plus any other words that describes or modifies what the subject is doing. So then again, also when it comes to the predicate, right, the complete predicate, it tells us what the best friend does. So this is basically simple subject as well as predicate, right? So subject and predicate, it basically tells us, like with the subject, it tells us who or what is doing something, and the predicate, it tells us basically what the subject is doing, right? It can either just be the subject, like the simple subject, plus any other words that basically tells us or describes or modifies it. And the same with the predicate. It is a simple predicate plus any other words that describe or modify it. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be the verb or just have to be the subject. All right. So we're going to a plus students.ca, and on a plus students.ca we are going to do our tutorial lesson, plus we are going to do our test. So we're going to a plus students.ca, and we're going to continue with our lessons, which is to identify the complete subject or complete predicate of a sentence. And we're going to identify the simple subject and simple predicate of the sentence. All right. All right, so going to the first lesson, which is to identify the complete subject or complete predicate of a sentence. And we see that when it comes to complete subject, right? A complete subject will either tell us who or what is doing something, and it is basically the simple subject plus any other words that describe or modify it. And then the same with the predicate, right? A predicate, it is what the subject is doing, and it is a simple predicate plus any other words that describe or modifies it. All right, so now we're going to our test where we're going to identify the complete subject or a complete predicate of a sentence. All right. So if we look at the first one, it says select the 6 words that make up the complete predicate. Remember the predicate, it tells us what the subject is doing, right? So it tells us what the subject is doing. It says a bad business deal caused friction between the two brothers, or do we say a bad business deal caused friction between the two brothers? So do we say option 1, which is caused friction between the two brothers, or do we say option 2, deal caused friction between the two? We need to choose the 6 words that make up the complete predicate. Option 1 or option 2. The complete predicate that tells us what the subject is doing. What the subject is doing. All right, and if we were to select the 6 words that make up our complete predicate, right? And then we will go with option 1. So a bad business deal caused friction between the two brothers. So option 1 is our predicate. We need to select the 6 words that make up the complete predicate. It says Kathleen pours sand through a plastic funnel, right? So which means that it is either option 1, which is pours sand through a plastic funnel, or option 2, which is Kathleen pours sand through a plastic funnel. So it is Kathleen pours sand through a plastic. we need to choose the complete predicate. Option 1, pours sand through a plastic funnel, or option 2, Kathleen pours sand through a plastic. All right, and if you choose the complete predicate, we would say pours sand through a plastic funnel. So it's option 1. All right, so option 1 it is. Select the 3 words that make up the complete subject, either who or what is doing something. The complete subject. Option 1, which says, my fearless friend, in my fearless friend flies down the ramp on her skateboard. So is it either my fearless friend or is it on her skateboard? We need to choose the correct subject. Option 1, my fearless friend, or option 2, on her skateboard. All right, and if we were to select the correct subject, then we will say my fearless friend, which is option 1. All right. We need to select the 2 words that make up the complete subject. The correspondent filed a story from Somalia about the food shortage. All right. So if we choose the 2 words that make up the complete subject, we'll say my, not my, the correspondent. The correspondent. That's the 2 words. That's a subject. So the correspondent. All right. We're going to select the two words that make up the complete subject. The complete subject. Many employers issue paychecks directly into employees' bank accounts. So we need to choose the option, is it many employers or is it bank accounts? And if we select the complete subject, right, the two words, then we will say it is many employers. So many employers tells us either who or what we are talking about, or that is doing the action. So many employers. We need to select the five words that make up a complete predicate. Remember, the predicate is like saying it's the verb plus any other words thereafter. And it tells us what the subject is doing. For example, not for example, but it says Croatia declared its independence in 1991. We now need to select that five words that make up a complete predicate. Is it option one, declared its independence in 1991? Or is it Croatia declared its independence in, which is option two? All right, then if we was to select the correct one, we would go with option one. All right, and we're going to the second one, which is to identify the simple subject or simple predicate of a sentence. Simple subject or the simple predicate of a sentence. So basically, every subject, right? Every sentence, sorry, has a subject and every sentence has a predicate, right? So every sentence has a subject and every sentence has a predicate. A simple subject, right? It tells us either who or what is doing something. This is now a simple subject, right? And when it comes to simple subject, then it is just the subject noun or pronoun. It is just the subject noun or is just the subject pronoun, right? Without any other words that describes or modify it. So we are not going to do what we did in the previous lesson, right? We're not going to now take, for example, the subject plus all the other words that it describes or modifies. We're only going to a simple sentence. It is just the noun or it is just the pronoun. No other words that describes or modifies it. If we look at a few examples, right, it says Jennifer sleeps late on the weekends. Jennifer sleeps late on the weekends. And if we look at that sentence, we need to ask ourselves, who sleeps late on the weekend, right? Then we only say Jennifer. Because remember, we only write the noun or we only identify the pronoun. No other words that describes or modifies it. Her best friend sleeps late on the weekends. Her best friend sleeps late on the weekends. So the simple subject only. For example, it says her best friend sleeps late on the weekend. And but remember, this is a simple subject, so we only choosing either the noun or choosing the pronoun, which is friend. And then we have Mrs. Peterson sleeps late on the weekends. Mrs. Peterson sleeps late on the weekends. And if we look specifically at the noun, the subject, sorry, which is only the noun or only the pronoun, right? Telling us who is doing something, then we say it is Mrs. Peterson. What is Mrs. Peterson doing? She sleeps late on the weekends. Who sleeps late on the weekends? It's Mrs. Peterson. So Mrs. Peterson is our subject, basically our noun, but it's a subject. All right. So basically, when it comes to the simple subject, right, it tells us who sleeps late on the weekend. But remember, it is only the subject noun or it is only the pronoun without any other words that describes or modifies it, right? Now, the same with the simple predicate. Now, the same with the simple predicate. It tells you what the subject is doing, and it is just only the verb without any other words that describe or modifies it. So it's only the verb. All right. If we look at an example, it says her best friend sleeps. So we can say her best friend sleeps. So now we need to ask ourselves what the subject is doing, right? It's like saying, what did her best friend do, or what is her best friend doing? And then we can say her best friend. So basically, the verb, and remember, it's only the verb without any other words to describe or modify it. And then we say it is sleeps. Now we're going on to the next one. It says her best friend sleeps late on the weekends, right? Remember, this is a simple predicate, so it is only the verb without any other words that describes or modifies it. So now we ask again, what is her best friend doing? Just sleeps. Not all the other words that describes or modifies it. All right, let's go to our test. So we're now going to select the simple predicate. We're going to select the simple predicate, right? It says Maki placed several pecans in her son's hands. So Maki placed several pecans in her son's hand. We need to choose or select the simple predicate. Is it placed, which is in option 1, or is it several in option 2? The verb only. All right, and if we were to choose the correct word, like the simple predicate, which is basically just the verb, then we will say it's option 1, which is placed. So option 1, which is placed. All right, so now we need to select the simple subject. The simple subject. Who is doing the action? It says, I limit my time watching television each day. Is it option 1, which is each, or option 2, which is I? So our simple subject, if we were to choose a simple subject, we would say it is I. So that is only a simple subject, only the noun or only the pronoun. We need to select the simple predicate, the verb. Many of my friends applied to the University of Texas at Austin or Austin. So we need to select the simple predicate only. Is it applied or many? Applied or many? It's the action that is being done. All right. And if we select the simple predicate within that sentence, we would say applied. Something that he did or something that they did together. We need to select the simple subject. Her assistant organized the piles of paperwork. So now we need to select the simple subject, only the noun or only the pronoun. Is it piles or is it assistant? All right. So if we select the subject, right, only the verb, only the noun, and then we will say it is assistant. All right. Well done. So now this is the last one. We need to select the simple subject that either tells us who or what is doing something. The narrator speaks in a low voice. The narrator speaks in a low voice. Is it low or is it narrator? Who or what is doing something? Low or narrator? And if we were to select our simple subject, then we would say narrator. All right. All right. So this is now the end of our lesson on subject and predicate, right? We have a complete subject, complete predicate, where you can basically still write down the, let's say, the subject plus all the other words that describes modify it, or the predicate and all the other words that describes and modifies it. But once you get to a simple subject or simple predicate, then it's either only the noun or pronoun, or it is only the verb and not the other words that describes it. All right. All right, so this is the end of our lesson on subject and predicate. Thank you very much for joining the class. You should have a good evening further. Goodbye.